Hi everybody, welcome to Big Brain Plays Gaming with Cognitive Differences. My name's Stacey Jenkins, I'm a disabled streamer and content creator. During the day I work as a commercial analyst at Sega Europe, where I also head up their disability employee network, and in my free time I'm a content creator, games accessibility reviewer and consultant. So I've spent the last 7 or 8 years or so building a place for disabled content creators like myself on Twitch, speaking at conventions, leading panels on diversity, inclusion and accessibility. I'm also a certified accessible player experiences practitioner thanks to Able Gamers, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I game personally as someone with a disability and specifically as someone that has cognitive issues. So I wasn't always disabled. I lived a very, very active lifestyle before I was hit with fibromyalgia about 7 or 8 years ago. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain condition, so that affects my whole body 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some days are better than others. It can definitely fluctuate depending on how hard I've pushed myself, what the weather is like, whether I've made an offering to the disability gods that day. And the days where the pain's so bad that I can't even support my own spine to sit upright in a chair like I'm doing now, I tend to spend curled up in a blanket playing video games. But I soon realised that I couldn't play video games like I used to. I actually started streaming on Twitch after I lost the ability to work full time. I was constantly tired, the pain was debilitating, but being able to stream whenever I wanted, for however long I wanted, and not only make a little bit of money and get some kind of financial independence, it was also that desperately needed social space for me when I was frankly super isolated. So being in constant pain can not only have a very physical impact on my ability to play games, for me it's things like not being able to grip a controller properly. It can also fry your brain and make it extremely difficult to complete tasks that require any kind of brain power, which in a lot of video games is a lot of them. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, what it's like to play video games as someone with cognitive barriers and what we can do for those players to remove those barriers and to keep them playing our games. So, cognitive disabilities can include things like autism, ADHD, dementia, dyslexia, to name a few, but more generally, anyone can actually have a cognitive impairment. So that might be related to another disability, like it is for me. It might be a temporary or situational disability. And you might recognise this nice little infographic from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit, which you should definitely check out if you haven't. So cognitive impairments can affect things like memory, concentration, communication, processing, and problem solving. And cognitive accessibility isn't always the first thing that comes to our minds when we talk about accessibility. It can be a kind of invisible problem. Sometimes it feels a little less tangible than other areas of accessibility. And it wasn't really something that I knew about until I realized that I needed it. So being able to, connect with other disabled streamers online and sharing our experiences, and eventually coming along to GA Conf in London and hearing from so many incredible speakers made me realise that there was actually a term for the kind of accessibility that I needed, and it was something that developers were actively working on, and it was something that could drastically improve my quality of life. And when the pain first got bad, the game that I turned to was Hearthstone. So I'd always wanted to learn a card game, but I always struggled with remembering the keywords, what things did, the order that I was meant to do things in, but Hearthstone had it all there in front of me, and all I had to do was hover over something to remind myself. And that game came at a time when the pain was really bad, it was very distracting, and being able to play a slower paced strategy game that didn't require me to have decent reflexes or remember too much was just the perfect fit for me. So this leads me nicely onto the first of the key areas that I want to talk to you about that can really help players with cognitive barriers enjoy your games. Reminders. So brain fog is exhausting and it's often difficult to remember anything, so having reminders in game to help me along really goes a long way. Things like quest tracking and logs are really helpful. So the recent Assassin's Creed games do this really well. They have objective reminders on screen at all times, so I don't end up getting distracted by chasing an animal that I want to pet and forgetting what I was actually meant to be doing. Another thing to keep in mind is also try and make your menu text readable on a standard sized TV from 6 feet away, and to playtest using this setup if possible. So when I'm streaming, I'm playing on a gaming monitor right in front of me, So mostly the menu text looks great, but when I retreat to the sofa at the end of the day to go full goblin mode, the text is often far too small for me to read from the sofa, and that's for someone with full vision. So we're starting now to see text resizing and stuff, which is fantastic, but quite often it will just be for the subtitles. Sometimes it will be for some of the text we see on screen, but quite rarely is the menu text itself resizable. So this example here, this is Hitman 3, which got its hooks into me recently. And as someone with memory issues, I absolutely loved that they have this whole intel menu, which logs anything important that I might hear or come across, so I can go back to it and remind myself of a key bit of information. But I do often have to get my husband to read it out loud for me because it's really tricky for me to read, and the focus and the effort that it takes to try and make out those tiny words is really exhausting. Control reminders are also really fantastic, especially in games that are quite complex and have a lot of different mechanics and systems to remember. So this example is from Watch Dogs Legion, which is super awesome. In this game, the control reminders pop up on screen whenever you engage in that activity. So when you get in a car or you're about to start hacking, the control reminders pop up for that particular activity, remind you what buttons you need to press to get going. Another big thing for me is onboarding. So having a really thorough tutorial that teaches the concepts one by one is absolutely key in helping all players play your game, but especially for those of us that have some cognitive barriers. We might need more time and more practice to grasp the key concepts, so having a replayable tutorial can be really helpful, as can having an actual practice mode where players can experiment and give it a go without the threat of failure. So the Hitman games have a really thorough tutorial that can be accessed and replayed at any time, as does Cyberpunk 2077. So this is useful not only for players with cognitive difficulties, but also players that have been away from the game for some time and need a refresher because they got distracted with another game and now 6 months have passed since they last played. Totally calling myself out here. So entire practice modes are also really useful, particularly when it comes to multiplayer games. So being able to play against AI and try out different characters, different weapons, different moves. So these two examples are from Overwatch and Bleeding Edge, which have really great examples of this. Next up is wayfinding. My sense of direction and ability to remember where I've been is pretty much non-existent in video games. So without a good map, markers and other kinds of navigation assistance, I will get lost pretty much constantly. So a clear map is really important. So we want to be able to see all the important information, but also not be too overwhelmed by it. So there's definitely a fine balance there. Color and contrast are super important, not just for cognitive disabilities, but for players with low vision as well. So we need to make sure that those icons on the map are readable, they don't blend into the background, players can pick them out. It's always really useful to have a legend explaining what those icons are, but to also have a filter as well. So players can reduce the amount of clutter that they see on screen and pick out the thing that they are looking for. This example is from one of my favorite games of all time. This is Sunset Overdrive, where they have a legend and you can select which of the markers that you want to see on your map, which is really great. So on-screen markers and mini-maps are also really useful, as long as those markers are actually big enough to see and make out from the environment. We're now also starting to see games that let us scale up the size of these markers and other aspects of the UI, which is fantastic. I'd definitely love to see more of. This example is from Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I'm about 200 hours in at the moment. So they allow you to size up their markers. They've also got beacons, so it's really easy to find your way around. So navigation assistance, so things like beacons, arrows and trails that you can follow that indicate the route you need to take are amazing, and giving the player the ability to trigger these means that we can use it if we need to, and players that prefer to explore and find their own way have the option to do that too. So The Last of Us 2 had a perfect example of this. It was such a simple indicator, just a big white arrow telling you where you need to go, but it was super effective and something I made use of really regularly. Another thing that really helps me is having multiple sensory cues. So Although I'm not deaf or hard of hearing, having captions on when I'm playing really helps me understand and process the dialogue because I'm seeing it and I'm hearing it at the same time. It's also really helpful for me to have speaker names because this helps me understand who's speaking, it gives me more information, so I'm less likely to get confused about what the heck is going on. So this is just one example where there's a lot of crossover with between players with different kinds of barriers. So, you know, design for one and solve for many, as we like to say. And this example is from Cyberpunk, which has speaker names, different colours. It's really easy to figure out who's speaking and follow what's going on, which is really important in a game like Cyberpunk, where there's a lot of story and a lot of info. So this is also something that I didn't realise I needed in puzzle games too. So despite having a very logical brain and a maths degree and working in data, I always really struggled with puzzle games and I never really understood why. And it was only when Immortals Fenyx Rising came out, which is the example here, and they had their puzzle assists, that I realised that I just needed more cues, I just needed more feedback. So the thing that I always had trouble with was not being able to see the result of the action that I was taking. So I might pull a lever over here, but I couldn't pick out the information on the screen that actually told me what that did. So with Fenyx Rising, I could hear an auditory cue that told me I made a thing happen, and there would also be a visual cue, which is the little arrow on screen to tell me where. So it said object spawned and it told me where that was. And that was revolutionary for me. I was so pumped that I could enjoy these puzzles and progress through the game instead of getting stuck and frustrated. Super awesome. And lastly, a brief note about motion sickness, which is something that I suffer with a lot. I know that most people tend to associate motion sickness with just VR, but I assure you there are plenty of us that can get motion sick with regular games too. It's a real talent. There have been countless games that I've been unable to complete because I've wanted to throw up 30 minutes in. As a streamer, I've pushed myself way past my limits just to make sure I had a full-length entertaining stream, and I've had to write off entire days to actually just go and lay down in the dark for about 8 hours afterwards. There's one particular game that would trigger nausea and a terrible migraine every single time, but it was a game that I loved, so I just kept doing it to myself in the hope that it would eventually go away, but it did not. So there are a bunch of different options that players can have a little play around with when it comes to motion sickness. So things such as motion blur, field of view, screen shake, weapon bob, having a persistent center dot. Having these options isn't always a guarantee that players won't get motion sick. So sometimes it can literally just be the way your camera moves in your game and there's not a lot you can do about it. But giving players those options to play around with is super, super helpful. And it can take a game from being completely unplayable for someone to something that they can actually finish. So the Marvel Avengers game that recently came out had a really intense screen shake during the beta that made it really difficult for me to play without getting a headache. But they actually took feedback on board and added the option to turn screen shake off. So that made a world of difference for me. So we've got the original with the screen shake on the left and then screen shake turned off on the right. And that made it playable for me. I was actually able to continue playing, and it was super, super awesome to see that they had taken that feedback on board and they just added an on or off. The Last of Us 2 also had a really good motion sickness menu that players could mess around with a bunch of the settings to figure out what worked for them. So I'd love to see more of this, particularly with first-person games, because they're also a big motion sickness risk for me. And that's it. I never want to stop playing video games. They're frankly a huge part of my life. They're part of my career, but they're also part of my rest and my recovery when my disability has flawed me. They're part of the social life I need when I'm isolated during a rough patch. I hope that my experiences have given you something to think about and reflect on. Hopefully there's something in there you can take away to help make your games even more accessible to players with cognitive barriers. Make sure to involve players with cognitive disabilities in your playtesting. We're here, there are a lot of us, and we have a lot of insight to share with you. So thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more about cognitive accessibility in particular, I've got a Cognitive Accessibility 101 video on my YouTube channel, as well as a bunch of cognitive accessibility game reviews. CanIPlayThat.com have a really useful cognitive accessibility reference guide if you want to have a look at the basics. And for more detail, I highly recommend GameAccessibilityGuidelines.com, which I'm sure many of you have used already, which has a really great cognitive accessibility section on each page that you can also use for reference. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me almost everywhere as Stacey of Gotham or Stacey Jenkins, or you can drop me an email at staceyofgotham@gmail.com. So thank you guys so much for listening, and have a fantastic rest of your GA conference.